Hello, and welcome to another episode of Code and Pixels. My name is Kelly, and I'm once again joined by my amazing co-host, Adekunle. Today, we'll be chatting with Michelle Chin about design ops.
Thanks, Kelly. Michelle is a design advocate at Zeroheight. Hey, Michelle. Thanks for being on the podcast. How are things going?
Things are going well. It's nice and sunny today in Oakland, and thank you so much for having me.
No problem. Love that. Cool. So, our first question is, can you describe your career path from your first job to where you're at right now?
Yeah, I was thinking about this morning, and my first job out of college, I was like a project coordinator at a science association. So I had an environmental science background and was trying to find a job that was doing something related. That was the closest I could find. And it was a lot of project coordinating, which then somehow I landed a web design job because I knew how to use like Photoshop and Illustrator and got into UX in this winding world of product design, and then ended up going back to more of like project coordination of like design ops. So looking back, it's kind of like come full circle. And now I'm a design advocate. So yeah.
Awesome. So, Michelle, for those that are new to design ops, can you tell us more about that and the purpose of the role?
Sure. So design ops is short for design operations, and that's really the management of all the things that design teams need. So a lot of managers and maybe other designers are doing operational things for the design team. So that can be anywhere from figuring out what tools to use, procuring the tools, figuring out processes for the team of like how do we track projects, deliver designs to engineering, how do we collaborate, also various team culture things as well. So I think a lot of people, even if you're not familiar with design ops as like a field or the role, you have been exposed to it in some capacity or could actually be doing design ops yourself.
I love that you talk about how teams work. It's not a specifically one thing, it's a lot of different things. At what point should an organization focus on something specifically around setting up design ops?
Typically, as your design team gets bigger, you'll find that scaling some more of the stuff like tooling and cultural practices and processes needs some effort by, a coordinated effort by an individual. So that's usually like a point where I guess the design manager or the individual contributor designer, it's taking more of their time to do the design ops work than their actual role. So handing that off to a design ops person, like usually a design program manager or a design ops manager, is where that really helps alleviate the workload to help keep the team successful. And I think that's the thing is like design ops people and program managers are, I like to liken it like as athletic trainers are kind of like the support team for if you think of the designers as athletes, right? So design athletes have like trainers, nutritionists, coach who all help them do their very best. And within design ops, it's so you have people who are really there to support the design team, so they can do some really cool innovation and design work.
That's great. Yeah, I love that you talk about alleviating some of the pain points of the team so that there's clear goals of either side of what everyone's trying to achieve. I was wondering, you mentioned that some teams might already be doing design ops work without an official title of that type of work. So I'm wondering when there are dedicated design ops, can that transition kind of feel like the original team is losing a sense of what they used to be, what they used to own? Are there any additional challenges faced by organizations when you're starting to define this specific set of skills and responsibilities? Because especially when you mention a smaller team might already be doing this when you start to scale. Can you talk a little bit about transitioning over that work and anything that you've observed?
Design ops can be new to a lot of teams, a lot of people, and it is, change is hard, even if we know it's for the best. So yeah, you could lose some of your identity or sense of control if you're, all of a sudden someone else is looking into tools for you to use. But I think the biggest thing is, design ops is a conversation. It's collaboration. So the idea is to alleviate some of the stuff that you designers don't want to do, like go through procurement or security reviews, but very much still hear the opinions from designers of what tools matter, what works. So a lot of this is coordinating the logistics, and that's a little new. So getting people adjusted to the process. I think a lot of times, when you're starting a design ops practice. So when I was at my old company, I wanted to do design ops, and so we tried to create a practice, and I was the design ops team of one, and people weren't really sure like what that meant, so they asked me to do a lot of things, and I had to be like, that's not what I'm here to do. I'm here to do this. And then I think sometimes because I was a single person, it was, this is Michelle's pet project, but really it was projects to help the team. So I think the biggest thing is like the biggest takeaway is like communicating expectations and having people understand, what the role is, what the role does, how the role supports you, what also the role isn't, just to clarify. And I think people are, willing to try and understand, but not having that expectation set at the beginning can make for some more interesting challenges.
I laughed at Michelle's pet project because I can see someone thinking, oh, Michelle is trying to own all of this stuff and this is just for her. And really, no, it's about the team. And it's one of those roles that I feel is very selfless. Like you're trying to do what's best for the team, but it can come off as you're making all the decisions. And I can see that being very challenging to set those expectations. And so I'm wondering, you talked about taking on this project, being the only one really driving some of this work. Do you have any recommendations around best practices for establishing workflows and introducing tooling or getting buy-in and things like that?
I think the biggest thing is having conversations with people, listening to what their needs are. So I remember when I started in the design ops capacity, the senior leadership was like, we would like you to work on these 4 initiatives. And that's what my main focus was. But then I think that's where it came off as this is Michelle's pet projects. But really they were stuff from management for the greater good of the team. So I think I definitely would have done a lot more listening to see if I can balance some of those needs with what leadership wanted. I think also creating a Kanban. So because we were getting requests left and right. Oh, I think this is a design ops thing, and yeah, they are. But as a design ops team of one, I can't do everything all at once. So I think that was the other thing is setting up a Kanban board, so at least people could put their thoughts in there, know that we saw them, recognize them, and could also see the other priorities that were in play. So if they had a better sense of like, okay, I put in this request, but I know Michelle's really busy with these other initiatives. So I'm okay waiting, right? So it's a lot of that's just having that visibility and building that trust, I think is what is like really helpful when starting a practice.
Yeah, I love that. I love the idea of listening and being more of like a supportive system to your colleagues. My question is, we have design ops, we have design systems. They have very similar roles, but sometimes it's different. Can you explain how would you classify what belongs into design ops versus like design systems?
There is some overlap and blurred lines and some confusion, and it really depends on how teams are set up. But I think in my capacity, when I took on the design ops role, they were also like, we want you to manage the design system. And I had prior design system experience, so it wasn't too big of a deal. I think the aspect is, so both of them serve teams. So your most immediate customers or users are your peers and your teammates, your engineer colleagues, your design colleagues, and so you're serving them for the most part. But with design systems, there's a little bit more of the tactical aspect of creating, designing, and code. So while I do come from a design background. I wasn't doing the actual designing. I was definitely putting input in, but that's something that, I think when you work on design systems, you need to have some familiarity with how product design works, how engineering works. But if you don't want to focus on design systems and just do regular design ops, you don't have to have that much subject matter expertise with design systems. But I think the other thing is design systems really do benefit from some sort of design ops or program management, because there needs to be someone that can help with the process, because design system processes can be very complicated when it comes to governance and getting other teams to consume the design and code libraries. So shepherding that process is very much can be helpful when you have a design ops person on your team. So because I think the other thing is the other aspect of design system, it's a lot of like communication, change management, and that's where design ops people can really come into play.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I was fortunate to work with like a design ops team in my last company, and one of the things they were super helpful with was like, hey, is this like a change you want to like broadcast? And they're able to help communicate that, because I think sometimes it's very hard to do that when you're like doing the work and trying to like advocate for the work. So I think that's where design ops fits in, and that collaboration between design ops and design systems. My next question is more a case of the interaction between design ops and DevOps. What is the idea of like working with other teams within the organization? Is it something that there's close collaboration? Like when do you kind of, as a team, figure out like what falls in design ops, what falls into DevOps or any other team?
I think, especially at a larger team, so I was working at an enterprise company, so lots of teams, lots of people. Everyone was starting to create their own ops. Well, DevOps is a little different because that's more about like the inner workings of development stuff, which I'm not that familiar with, but I know it's it's way more technical. But I definitely was advocating with the design system. I was like, I need like an engineering ops counterpart to, like, so I guess like a technical program manager. But yeah, we also had like project management ops people, and there's business ops people. So I was starting to have conversations with those members because there's definitely stuff that we all similarly do, like looking at procuring software or security reviews, or understanding like you might help with like the career like annual reviews, that type of stuff, like those processes. So more of the people, team, HR responsibilities that you're helping shepherd. So it's a good opportunity just because, especially since I was a design ops team of one, I didn't have anyone really to talk to about some of these things. Like I could talk to other managers, but they're busy doing other stuff. So one way was to reach out and check to see like, hey, what how might we collaborate as ops people, navigating like the larger business practices.
Yeah, I think that's I definitely learned more about the benefits of operations, because I think as a IC, like, all right, like everything works, da, 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 and then sometimes like Jira will break, or maybe someone doesn't have access to the tools and whatnot, and that's where I feel like the operations more of that like foundation layer where it's like invisible until something bad happens, which is similar to like design systems. Cool. So the next question I have is more in the case of, you talked about you were a product manager, did product design and into design ops. Can you talk about the challenges you faced along your career and how you overcame them?
It's like being very fluid with what opportunities you have or might have, and exploring. So I think a lot of times, you know, I wonder how long can I do this role as like a product designer? Like I really enjoyed product. I at a point I was like, oh man, all these new hires we're hiring are way better than I am at design. And so, more of my idea was like, how can I support them and what can I do? And so that's kind of how I fell into design ops. And I it wasn't like a instant one day I'm gonna do design ops. It was like a 2 year thing that I mulled over. I'm like, is this where I want to transition? Like, am I not gonna touch design tools? Like, what is that gonna look like? So I think, going to conferences, speaking with people, like listening to podcasts and reading articles is a really great way to get some exposure to some ideas, good way to network. And, it was helpful to talk to people. And I went to the Design Ops Summit conference that Rosenfeld Media hosts, and I met a lot of people who did design ops. And I was like, oh, they seem to have a lot of fun. Maybe this is for me. And for me, the way I kind of helped myself justify it was like, I'm still doing design, but it's just a different type of design. So, I'm designing processes for people rather than, making designs in Figma.
That sounds cool. It's kind of funny. I didn't know about Design Ops until I went to Design Ops Summit, and I was kind of blown away by how passionate, but also like how much knowledge I just learned from that. Because I was like, oh yeah, Design Ops, it's pretty easy. But once you get into like these bigger companies, it's like it's basically like you're a scientist trying to figure out like how to like connect these tissues together. So big shout out to Lou for that. And next question is kind of a case of like you kind of touch on in the last your last answer, but how do you stay motivated and continue your career growth? Because I know design ops is fairly new, so there might not be cases where there's a lot of resources about like how to level up. But I'm wondering, how do you continue to grow from your perspective?
I think the thing is like you need to find your fellow design ops people, and uh, there's design ops assembly Slack, which is a great place to meet design ops, people who are actively working in it, people who kind of pioneered the discipline. The conferences like the Design Ops Summit conference are really great ways to kind of find your tribe. And it's a good way to, because I think for me, when I was having challenges of like, communicating things and getting people on board, I was like, "Hey, what do I do?" And people are like, "Oh yeah, like this is a common problem." And I felt like immediately like relieved. I was like, "Okay, it's not just me." And then they gave me some really great tips and advice, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is like great," because I didn't have anyone to talk to. So I think that was really exciting that there is a tribe of people who really do love design ops and are happy to share best practices. And you can definitely grow from that and get the mentorship that you need.
I remember when I first started in design systems and going, is design systems itself ops? Because there's, like what Adekunle mentioned, there's so much overlap between the two, and it can kind of get a little hazy with who does what and where does one role start and the other end. So, Michelle, I wanted to ask you more specifics around your current role. I know we've talked a lot about design ops, but your role is a design advocate.
As a design advocate, I am helping other like customers, so design teams and specifically design system teams, like navigate kind of like a lot of their chunky problems with design systems. So not so much about let me help you use Figma, but like how do we get adoption, right? Like how do we get people adopting the design system? How do we get a good governance model that people are happy with? That type of thing. So getting creative with processes. And I think the thing is like unfortunately there's no one size fits all, because then I probably wouldn't have a job, but my job would definitely be a lot easier. It's everything is so different depending on how engineering teams are structured, what agile processes they're using, what code bases they're using, because a lot of times some teams might be working on a different product that was created in Angular, and a new product is using React or what have you, right? So there's a lot of like varying factors that come into play. So when it comes to designing a process, it's not about like full on implementing, like I have created this like miracle 15-step process with all these tools. A lot of it's just kind of easing people into the change in the process. So a lot of program managers and design ops people, their talent is like adding just enough process so people know that there needs to be some guardrails, but it's not like you must do this or else. A lot of times it's trying to figure out like what kind of works for the team already. So, are they already in Jira? Cool, then we'll use Jira versus like, let's try this new other tracking software that doesn't even connect to your code, right? Like that type of stuff, like nothing too jarring. So just kind of easing into things of like, let's see what we can put together. And I think that makes it a lot easier for everyone. Like people are, okay, I already know how to use this tool. We do this similar for design deliverables, engineering, implementations and that type of stuff. So it makes things a lot easier. And then I think the aspect is like trying it out for a couple of sprints, maybe a quarter, and then figuring out what worked and didn't work and constantly having that like feedback loop is also super helpful when creating a process. So it's just like a very much like I try to take a very casual like let's ease into this approach, which I think seems to help a lot of people because I know change is hard, and I think especially within like the past 4 years we had a lot of disruptions that we had to like navigate. So you don't need to introduce more more of that.
I hear you. I feel like these past few years have all been a blur.
Very much so.
With all your experience in working in design ops, design advocacy, do you have a hot take you want to share with our listeners?
So this is actually a borrowed hot take from one of my coworkers, which I was like, oh, I never thought about that. So I think a lot of times people are like, okay, our organization's big enough now. Let's like form design ops, and let's get serious about this. But like his hot take is like, you need design ops at like every level, like even a startup. Don't wait until you're bigger. You should have design ops like right now. And I was like, oh, that makes sense. Because if you think about it, especially a startup, when you have like a small design team, you're running pretty scrappy and you're wearing multiple hats. You're doing a lot of stuff. You're trying to like get stuff, features implemented, get stuff designed. You don't have time to like do all this other like, process and management and, like connecting the dots within different cross functional teams. So I think that can be definitely a little chaotic. So introducing a design ops person early on can really help make things go a lot smoother. So yeah, I don't know if the budget gods approve of that, but I think it would be really awesome if more smaller teams had design ops sooner on, like actual dedicated design ops people.
It's funny. I think I agree with that with a lot of stuff. Like even with like DevOps or even like design systems, you're probably not gonna have like one person or have a dedicated person focus on it. So it might be like a team effort. So you have something, and then you get to a point where it starts hurting. And you're like, all right, we need to get a dedicated person, and then that dedicated person could like optimize that process overall. So I actually agree with that hot take. So Michelle, let's say one of our listeners is like, oh, I really want to get into like be a design advocate. What is the one piece of advice you can give them?
Let's see. I think like I mean, I think I kind of fell into this role. I wasn't expecting it. So I think it's like, being open to being an advocate not just for your team but like for other teams as well, and getting practice around networking and speaking with people, presentations, like try your hand at that and see what it feels like. Because that's kind of how I ended up getting started down this path of like I would do conference talks and share what I've learned with others, and that was really cool. So to do stuff like that and work with other teams has been really fun and really helpful. So, but I don't know, I wouldn't have thought about doing design advocacy ever, like looking back, even like, I don't know, 3 years, I would never, it would never have crossed my mind. So, yeah, I think just experiment and see how it goes.
I feel like that's kind of funny because I was kind of the same way where it's like I wanted to be a painter and I hated to code, but now look at me here. I'm doing it for a living. So life is always a mystery. So just try things out and see what happens.
Yeah, just go with the path, right? Go with the flow.
Love it. Next question. Where can folks find you, and do you have anything to plug?
Yeah, so I think LinkedIn is probably the best way to find me and get a hold of me and see like what I'm up to. So this year I'm doing two big things because one big thing wasn't enough. I'm going to start doing career coaching more seriously for marginalized and underrepresented people. So people can find that information on fromthemargins.tech. And then I'm also starting a global pattern library for design systems. So kind of taking the cultural context and creating patterns for that.
Love it. Love it. Cool. Well, thank you, Michelle, for joining us for today's conversation. We want to thank our listeners for tuning into today's episodes. For more content, feel free to visit our website, codingpixels.fm. And also don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter for updates and upcoming episodes. Thank you and have a fantastic day, everyone.
Thanks.